Hey, my name's Ryan Handel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FIXE. Started FIXE about 5 or 6 years ago. I own restaurants here in Los Angeles. Thought there was a more efficient, streamlined way of doing restaurant bookkeeping. I wanted to talk today a little bit about if I were to start a restaurant today, here are some things that I would do and know going into my first restaurant or into any restaurant for that matter before you open it. One, when I opened up my first restaurant back in 2010, I thought I had done everything right. I thought I had done all my research. I went to school. I had worked in restaurants. I was going to hit the ground running. I was very careful in choosing an architect and doing all those things. And I had a great partner. Well, when we signed the lease for an existing restaurant, we thought we were going to have a quick build out and we would be fine. But in Los Angeles, it turns out that when you sign up for a restaurant, you got to make sure it's a sit down restaurant. And in our case, it was zoned for a takeout restaurant. And for the city of Los Angeles, that meant you could have no seats in it. And so we all of a sudden panicked. We didn't know what we were doing. And we had to eat a lot of money, paying a lot of rent for time that we wasted in trying to get this permit. And what ended up happening was that after a lot of research and a lot of time figuring out how to maneuver around the city, we found the original architectural plans from 1984. And in 1984, those architectural plans had seats on it. It was almost like finding like the Holy Grail in Indiana Jones. We couldn't believe we found it. And the permit said zone for restaurant / takeout, not just takeout restaurant. And when we showed that to the city and said, hey, they intended to have seats, we were able to get by. That leads me to, if you're starting a restaurant today, what do you need to do? And ultimately, you need to make sure that your permitting is fine, right? You need to make sure that you're zoned correctly. Obviously, different cities have different permitting restrictions, but if you're taking over a restaurant, you better be sure you can open up another restaurant there. If you're going to take over an existing space that's not a restaurant, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money to get that off the ground. And so there's permitting and there's other lobbyist type maneuvering that you need to do in order to convert that. In addition, you want to make sure that your rent is straight, right? You want to make sure that your rent doesn't start kicking in until you have all of your permits, that hopefully you can get a significant amount of tenant improvement dollars in order to build your restaurant. And your rent, you really want to try to be 8% of your revenue, right? So if you think you're going to do $1 million a year, then your rent shouldn't be more than $80,000 a year. If your rent is higher than $80,000 a year, then you better be sure you're going to do more revenue than that. The next thing you have to worry about is how much is it going to take for me to build this thing? Sometimes people get into spaces and you always see it on all the shows, the DIY shows where they open up the walls and they find all this mold and stuff. Well, ultimately, it's kind of the same thing in restaurants, right? You need to make sure that your build out costs are sound. You could figure that to build out a restaurant, you're going to be spending about $500 a square foot. That maybe includes all of your equipment. Fancier restaurants might be a little bit more money. Maybe if it's a to-go restaurant, like I have some taco shops, they could be a little less money. If you're taking over an existing restaurant space, you might be able to save some money on utilities and things like that. But if you're doing it for the first time, I would budget about $500 a square foot. So if you have a 1,000 square foot restaurant, figure you're going to spend about $500,000. Next, if you're going to spend $500,000, you got to figure out how fast are you going to be in order to pay that investment back. You don't want to raise money and be able to pay that back in a long time. No investor is going to invest in you. Typically with restaurants, because they are perceived to be risky, you want to be able to pay your investors back in about 3 years. So going back, if you're going to build a 1,000 square foot restaurant, it's going to cost you $500 a square foot, then you had better be sure that you're going to be able to pay that $500,000 back in roughly 3 years, or you're going to be able to drop about $150,000 to $175,000 in profit to the bottom line every single year. And if you go backwards a little bit and you say, hey, I'm going to make $150,000 profit. My rent is going to be 8%. My cost of goods and labor is going to be roughly 60%, or my prime cost between the two of them. Then you can kind of back in and see what your sales need to be in order to make that work. If you're going to be profitable, but it costs you a lot of money to open up that restaurant, it may not be the best use of funds and you might have to check out another space. Or if you think that space is going to be expensive, but you're really going to crank up the sales there and you're going to do over $1,000 a square foot in sales, then that might make sense. But ultimately, you want to look at your rent being 8%. You want to look at your permitting. You want to look at your construction costs. And the one thing I forgot to mention, which I briefly touched upon, is sales. Some people try to do sales, how many seats I have in the restaurant. Some people try to say how many meal periods. Ultimately, I think sales is just a percentage of square feet. Basically, if you take a good rule of thumb that I'm going to do $1,000 a square foot in sales per year, that means if you have a 1,000 square foot restaurant, you're going to do about $1 million in sales. If it's a little fancier, higher check average, maybe it goes up to $1,500 a square foot. But don't think you have a 1,000 square foot restaurant and you're going to do like $5 million in sales. It's very rare that that ever happens, right? So take some good rules of thumb, make that math work, and then open up your first restaurant. I hope this was helpful for you. Obviously, we do a lot of things at FIXE. We try to advise our restaurants. We try to steer them in the right direction. We're not CFOs, but we have a lot of experience in this industry. Like and subscribe, or put a comment if you think we're full of crap. Thanks again.